Hey everyone, it's Chica. Does your WordPress Site Health status recommend that you use a persistent object cache? Mine does. Let's talk about what that means, whether or not you need it, and how you can set it up. First, let's talk about caching in general. There's lots of different types of caching, but it basically means saving a copy of something to save on processing time the next time that you need it. For example, if you look at 10 different projects on chicaandjoe.com, our logo appears on every single one of those pages, but your web browser knows better than to load that image fresh from the server every single time. Instead, it stores a copy in the local cache. That way, the image is right there to access the next time you view another project. Think of it like learning your multiplication tables. When someone asks you what 7 times 5 is, you don't take the time to count it out or add up all of those 7s. You learned it once and you cache the answer in your brain. 35. There's no need to perform any more calculations because your brain has it cached in memory, and the next time someone asks, you know the answer. Okay, so the logo example I gave you is a very basic example of local browser caching, but we all know WordPress is much more complex than that. There are databases involved and queries that can return a bunch of data every time someone loads one of your pages. If your homepage displays your 8 most recent projects, that is determined by a database query performed by WordPress. It checks the current date, looks at all of your posts, and finds the 8 most recent ones to display on the page. But in a few minutes or even a few seconds when someone else asks for that same page, the results are most often going to be exactly the same, so there's no reason to perform those calculations again. WordPress just needs to save that information somewhere on the server, and that is server-side caching. Caching can have a huge impact on your website. Big queries that can take a few seconds to run the first time now can only take milliseconds a second time because the answer is stored in cache and can be served up immediately. And the more content you have and the more visitors to your site, the more caching can really help. There are actually several types of caching, but the two that I want to talk about are page caching and object caching. Page caching involves storing the entire HTML of a page so that it can be served up without much effort. This includes image files and any database queries that were required in order to generate that page. You can enable page caching on your WordPress installation using any number of plugins. We happen to use WP Super Cache, which works really well for us. Now, object caching involves storing individual database queries for reuse, not entire pages. WordPress is totally database driven, so anytime you can store frequently run database queries in cache, that will really help. If you have a high traffic site, you're going to be running tons of queries. And if you are not optimizing them, it can really negatively impact your performance. By default, WordPress does some object caching, but only for a single page load. It keeps the objects in cache only until that page is done loading, and then it dumps them. So the next time that page is loaded, all of those queries need to be run from scratch. Now, this is where persistent object caching comes into play. If you can keep those objects in cache between multiple page loads, your site will be much more efficient. Now you see why the Site Health status is recommending that you do persistent object caching. So how do you get persistent object caching? Well, there are tools and plugins, of course, but they require a very specific server environment. So this is where you might need cooperation from your hosting provider in order to be able to set this up. For example, there's a very popular tool that can do this called Redis. It's very well supported, very powerful, but it does have a specific server environment required. There's a WordPress plugin called Redis Object Cache, but your site has to be on a PHP environment that can support it before the plugin will work. So remember when the Site Health status told you that you may need to contact your hosting provider for help? This is where it comes in. You need to reach out to them to see if you have the PHP environment, server environment, that can support the Redis plugin. They will be able to tell you if your server has the environment to be able to support this type of caching. You can search your host documentation or you can contact them to ask. FYI, I use Bluehost and I just verified with them today that they do support Redis on all of their hosting plans. So if your host supports Redis, great. Go ahead and install the plugin and get going. If not, they may have other tools that they offer either for free or at additional cost, so ask them what they recommend. Now, having said all of that, is it worth going to the trouble to set up persistent object caching? Well, if your site is large, has lots of visitors, and your content does not change frequently, then yes, it is worth exploring so that you can make your site as efficient as possible. But if your site is new or really small, this isn't going to have a big impact on you for now. So you can save a little bit of time for now. Just install a page caching plugin. Just remember, when you hit it big, you're probably going to want to come back and look at this again. I hope that helped clear up caching for you. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.